The crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the marble floors of the Pemberton Estate as Victoria Pemberton, the CEO's wife, looked me up and down with pure disgust. "You're nothing but a gold digger," she spat, her diamond-encrusted fingers pointing accusingly at my simple black dress. "I know exactly what you're after." What she didn't know was that the simple dress cost more than her monthly allowance, and the foundation I quietly ran had just donated more money to charity in 1 month than her husband's company made in profit all year. By the end of that night, her entire world would crumble when she discovered the truth about who I really was. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The evening had started like any other charity gala in Manhattan's Upper East Side. I had arrived at the Pemberton Estate, a sprawling mansion overlooking Central Park, for what was supposed to be an elegant fundraiser for children's literacy. The invitation had come through my assistant, though I rarely attended these society events. I preferred to make my charitable contributions quietly, without the fanfare that seemed to consume the social elite of New York. I had chosen to wear an understated black Valentino dress, something elegant but not flashy. My jewelry was minimal, a simple strand of pearls that had belonged to my grandmother and small diamond earrings. I never felt the need to announce my wealth through ostentatious displays. True confidence, I had learned, came from knowing your own worth without needing to broadcast it to the world. The mansion's grand foyer was filled with the city's most prominent figures. Politicians, business leaders, and socialites mingled beneath oil paintings worth more than most people's homes. I recognized several faces from Forbes lists and society pages, though I doubted many of them would recognize me. I had always preferred to stay out of the spotlight, conducting my business and philanthropy through carefully managed channels that protected my privacy. As I moved through the crowd, accepting a glass of champagne from a white-gloved server, I couldn't help but notice the subtle hierarchies at play. The way certain groups formed and reformed based on net worth and social standing. The calculated air kisses and rehearsed compliments. It was a world I could afford to be part of, but had never particularly wanted to join. That's when I first spotted Marcus Pemberton across the room. Tall, distinguished, with salt and pepper hair and an easy smile, he was the kind of man who commanded attention without demanding it. As the CEO of Pemberton Industries, a mid-sized manufacturing company, he was certainly successful by most standards. But what drew my attention wasn't his status or his looks. It was the way he seemed genuinely engaged in conversation with an elderly woman who was clearly not part of the social elite. While others performed their networking rituals, he was listening intently to her stories about her late husband's military service. Our eyes met across the room, and he smiled warmly before excusing himself from his conversation. As he approached, I noticed several women and men watching our interaction with barely concealed interest. In this world, every conversation was potential gossip, every glance a possible scandal. "I don't believe we've met," he said, extending his hand with old-fashioned courtesy. "Marcus Pemberton, thank you for coming tonight." "Elena Rodriguez," I replied, accepting his handshake. His grip was firm but not aggressive, his smile reaching his eyes in a way that suggested genuine warmth rather than practiced charm. We fell into easy conversation about the evening's cause, discovering a shared passion for education and literacy programs. He spoke knowledgeably about the challenges facing underfunded schools, and I found myself impressed by his genuine commitment to making a difference. It was refreshing to meet someone in this environment who seemed more interested in impact than image. "Are you involved in education yourself?" he asked, and I chose my words carefully. "I work with several literacy programs," I said, which was true, though it barely scratched the surface of my involvement. Through my foundation, I had funded the construction of 12 libraries in underserved communities and provided scholarship money for over 200 students. But something about this environment made me cautious about revealing too much too soon. As we continued talking, I became aware of a presence approaching from behind Marcus. The energy shifted noticeably. Conversations around us grew quieter, and I saw several people glance in our direction, with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely contained glee. "Marcus, darling," came a voice dripping with false sweetness and barely restrained venom. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your new friend?" I turned to see Victoria Pemberton for the first time. She was undeniably beautiful in the way that money could buy, perfectly styled blonde hair, flawless makeup, a designer gown that probably cost more than most people's cars. But there was something cold in her green eyes, a calculating hardness that no amount of cosmetics could soften. "Of course," Marcus said, though I noticed a slight tension in his shoulders. "Victoria, this is Elena Rodriguez." "Elena, my wife, Victoria." Victoria's smile was razor-sharp as she looked me up and down with undisguised assessment. I could practically see her mental calculator working, totaling up the estimated cost of my outfit, my jewelry, my shoes. Her expression grew progressively more disdainful with each calculation. "How lovely," she said, her tone suggesting it was anything but. "And what do you do, Elena?" The question was loaded with implication. In Victoria's world, there were women who had their own money and women who were after other people's money. Based on her assessment of my appearance, she had clearly placed me in the latter category. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I work in philanthropy," I answered simply. Victoria's laugh was like crystal breaking. "How noble! And I suppose you're passionate about helping the less fortunate?" Before I could respond, she had moved closer, positioning herself between Marcus and me in a gesture that was both subtle and unmistakable. Her hand rested possessively on his arm as she continued her interrogation. "It's so important to be careful about the people we allow into our circle," she said, her words ostensibly directed at Marcus but clearly meant for me. "There are so many people out there who pretend to be something they're not." I felt the familiar fire beginning to kindle in my chest, the same feeling I had experienced years ago, when I had been underestimated and dismissed by people who thought they knew my worth based on appearances. But I had learned patience over the years, learned the power of letting people reveal themselves before making my own moves. "I completely agree," I said mildly. "Authenticity is so rare these days." Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly at my calm response. She had expected defensiveness, perhaps embarrassment. My composure seemed to unsettle her, and I watched as she recalibrated her approach. "Marcus is such a generous man," she continued, her grip tightening on his arm. "Always willing to help those in need, sometimes too generous if you ask me." The implication was clear, and I saw Marcus's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Around us, the conversations had grown quieter, as people sensed the brewing conflict. This was exactly the kind of drama that fueled the society gossip mill for weeks. "Generosity is a wonderful quality," I replied. "Though I find the most genuine charity happens quietly, without fanfare." It was a subtle dig, referencing the elaborate nature of the evening's event, and Victoria caught it immediately. Her smile became even more brittle. "Of course, some of us believe in using our platforms to inspire others to give," she said. "When you have the means, you have the responsibility to set an example." She gestured around the opulent room, her diamond bracelet catching the light from the chandelier above. The gesture was meant to establish her position in the social hierarchy, to remind everyone present of the wealth and status she commanded. "The Pemberton family has been a pillar of this community for generations," she continued, her voice carrying just enough to reach the ears of those around us. "We understand the importance of maintaining certain standards." The word, standards, hung in the air like a challenge. It was clear that, in Victoria's assessment, I did not meet those standards. I was an outsider, a threat to be neutralized before I could gain any foothold in her carefully constructed world. Marcus finally spoke up, his voice carrying a warning edge. "Victoria, perhaps we should." But she cut him off with a wave of her hand. "No, darling. I think it's important that everyone understands the situation." She turned back to me, her eyes glittering with malicious satisfaction. "You see, Elena, we get a lot of women at these events who are looking for opportunities. Women who think they can charm their way into a lifestyle they haven't earned." The accusation hung between us like a gauntlet thrown down. Around us, I could hear the sharp intake of breath from several observers. This was no longer a subtle social sparring match. Victoria had drawn her weapon and aimed it directly at my heart. "I see," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "And what exactly are you suggesting?" Victoria's smile was triumphant now. She thought she had cornered me, forced me into a position where I would have to either defend myself desperately or retreat in humiliation. "I'm not suggesting anything," she said with false innocence. "I'm simply observing that some people have a very specific agenda when they approach wealthy men at charity events." The word, gold digger, hung unspoken in the air, but everyone present understood the implication. This was character assassination, of the most public kind, designed to humiliate me and establish Victoria's dominance over her territory. I took a slow sip of my champagne, using the moment to center myself. Years of business negotiations had taught me the value of patience, of letting your opponent overplay their hand before revealing your own cards. "How perceptive of you," I said finally. "You're absolutely right that some people aren't what they appear to be." Victoria's eyes gleamed with victory, thinking I was admitting to her accusations. She opened her mouth to deliver what was undoubtedly going to be the killing blow, but I continued speaking. "In fact, I'd say appearances can be incredibly deceiving. Someone might seem wealthy and powerful based on their surroundings, their clothes, their jewelry." I paused, letting my gaze take in the opulent room. But true wealth, the kind that comes from building something meaningful, from creating value rather than simply inheriting it, that's much harder to spot. The smile began to fade from Victoria's face as she realized I wasn't collapsing under her attack. If anything, I seemed to be growing more confident, more composed. "Some people," I continued, my voice growing stronger, "spend so much time protecting what they think they have that they never bother to understand what real power looks like." Marcus was staring at me now with a mixture of surprise and something that looked like respect. The crowd around us had grown completely silent, sensing that the dynamics of this confrontation were shifting in ways they hadn't anticipated. Victoria's face was beginning to flush with anger and embarrassment. This wasn't going according to her script. I was supposed to be the one crumbling under public scrutiny, not turning the tables on her. "How dare you?" she began, but I held up a gentle hand. "I'm sorry if I've given you the wrong impression about my intentions tonight," I said, my tone now almost apologetic. "I came here to support children's literacy, not to cause any uncomfortable misunderstandings." It was a masterful deflection, reframing her attack as a misunderstanding rather than a deliberate assault. It made her look paranoid and small, while positioning me as the gracious victim of her unfounded suspicions. But I wasn't done yet. The fire that had been building in my chest was now a controlled burn, and I had decided it was time to give Victoria a small preview of what she was really dealing with. "Although," I added, as if the thought had just occurred to me, "I should mention that I'll be making a donation tonight. I hadn't planned to announce it, but given the importance of the cause." I paused, watching Victoria's face as I continued. "I'll be contributing $500,000 to the literacy program." The number hit the crowd like a physical blow. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, champagne glasses froze halfway to lips, and all eyes turned to me with a mixture of shock and newfound respect. Victoria's face went white. The Pembertons' contribution to their own charity event had been $50,000, a generous sum by most standards, but suddenly dwarfed by my casual announcement. "500,000?" Marcus repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded as if it were a perfectly normal amount. "Education is so important, don't you think? And when you have the means to make a real difference, well," I shrugged gracefully. "It seems like the right thing to do." The power dynamics in the room had shifted so dramatically that I could practically feel the social hierarchy rearranging itself around me. People who had barely noticed my presence 5 minutes ago were now studying me with intense curiosity, trying to figure out who I really was and how they had missed my significance. Victoria stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, clearly struggling to process what had just happened. Her attempt to expose me as a gold digger had backfired spectacularly, revealing instead that I had more disposable income than most of the people in the room. But I could see in her eyes that she wasn't ready to surrender. This was her world, her event, her territory. She would regroup and come back stronger, more vicious. This was just the opening salvo in what would become a much larger war. As if reading my thoughts, Victoria's expression hardened into something cold and calculating. The humiliation of being upstaged at her own event was transforming into a dangerous combination of wounded pride and seething resentment. "How generous," she said finally, her voice like ice. "Though I do hope you haven't overextended yourself financially. It would be such a shame if you couldn't actually honor such a large commitment." It was a desperate attempt to regain the upper hand, to suggest that my donation was somehow fraudulent or beyond my means. But it came across as petty and small, particularly given that I had just demonstrated more financial capability than anyone else in the room. The evening was far from over, and I knew that Victoria Pemberton had just declared war on the wrong woman. Victoria's icy challenge hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall, but I had already moved beyond her petty attempts to discredit me. The crowd around us had grown larger, drawn by the electric tension and the shocking revelation of my donation. I could see the wheels turning in their minds as they tried to reconcile the woman they had dismissed moments ago with someone who could casually pledge $500,000 to charity. "You're absolutely right to be concerned about financial responsibility," I replied calmly, reaching into my small evening clutch, which is why I always come prepared. I withdrew a simple business card and handed it to Marcus, though my eyes remained fixed on Victoria. "Please have your finance team contact my foundation's accounting department tomorrow. They'll arrange the wire transfer." Marcus took the card with trembling fingers, his eyes widening as he read the elegant script. "Elena Rodriguez, founder and CEO, Phoenix Educational Foundation." Below the text was an address on Fifth Avenue that commanded some of the highest real estate prices in Manhattan. "Phoenix Educational Foundation?" Marcus whispered, recognition dawning in his voice. "You're the Elena Rodriguez who built the Rivera Library Network?" A murmur rippled through the crowd as people began to connect the dots. The Rivera Library Network was legendary in philanthropic circles. 12 state-of-the-art libraries built in underserved communities across the country, each one a masterpiece of architecture and community planning. The foundation had been profiled in Forbes, Fortune, and the Wall Street Journal for its innovative approach to combating educational inequality. Victoria's face had gone from white to an alarming shade of gray as she began to understand the magnitude of her miscalculation. This wasn't just any wealthy woman. This was someone whose foundation had assets that dwarfed her husband's entire company. "I prefer to let the work speak for itself," I said modestly, though inside I was savoring every moment of Victoria's growing horror. "Building sustainable educational infrastructure has always been more important to me than building a public profile." An elderly man I recognized as Senator Harrison pushed through the crowd, his eyes bright with excitement. "Miss Rodriguez, I had no idea you were here tonight. My granddaughter just received one of your STEM scholarships for MIT. She talks about you constantly." More recognition began cascading through the gathering. A young woman approached nervously, introducing herself as Dr. Sarah Mitchell, whose research on childhood literacy had been funded by my foundation for the past 3 years. Behind her came James Chen, whose inner-city school had been transformed by one of my technology grants. With each introduction, each grateful handshake, Victoria seemed to shrink further into herself. The woman she had tried to expose as a gold digger was being revealed as one of the most significant philanthropists of the generation. Her husband's charity event, which she had orchestrated to showcase their family's generosity, was being overshadowed by a woman who gave away more money in a month than the Pembertons made in a year. "I don't understand," Victoria finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. If you have so much, why didn't you say anything earlier?" I turned to face her fully for the first time since the confrontation began, and I saw something I had never expected to see in Victoria Pemberton's eyes. Genuine vulnerability. Behind all the designer armor and calculated cruelty was a woman who had just realized she had been living in a much smaller world than she thought. "Because real wealth doesn't need to announce itself," I said gently, though my words carried the weight of absolute truth. "When you've built something meaningful, when you've dedicated your life to lifting others up instead of tearing them down, you don't need to wear it like a badge. The work itself is the reward." Marcus had been listening to this exchange with growing amazement and what looked suspiciously like admiration. "Elena, I have to ask, why did you come tonight?" With your foundation's resources, you could host events like this every week. I smiled, thinking of the real reason I had attended. Actually, I came because I was researching potential partnerships. Your company's manufacturing capabilities could be valuable for some of our infrastructure projects. I thought tonight would be a good opportunity to meet you informally, away from boardrooms and presentations. The irony was delicious and complete. Victoria had accused me of being a gold digger, when in reality I had been considering whether to offer her husband a lucrative business opportunity. Her paranoid attack had been directed at someone who could have significantly improved their family's financial situation. But, I continued, glancing around the room at the faces watching our every word, I have to say, tonight has been quite illuminating in terms of the kind of people I'd be partnering with. Victoria's remaining composure finally cracked. Tears began to form in her eyes as the full scope of her mistake became clear. She had not only humiliated herself in front of New York's social elite, but she had potentially cost her husband a business opportunity that could have transformed their company. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. I was trying to protect. You were trying to protect your territory, I said, not unkindly but with absolute clarity. I understand that instinct, but protection that comes from attacking others, from making assumptions based on appearances, from believing that someone else's success somehow diminishes your own, that's not protection. That's fear. The crowd around us had grown completely silent. This had moved far beyond social drama into something deeper, more profound. They were witnessing not just the resolution of a conflict, but a masterclass in grace under pressure, and the power of authentic confidence. True security, I continued, my voice carrying to every corner of the room, comes from building something bigger than yourself. From knowing that your worth isn't threatened by other people's achievements but enhanced by them. From understanding that there's enough success, enough opportunity, enough abundance in this world for everyone to thrive. I reached into my clutch again and withdrew my checkbook. A simple, leather-bound book that looked utterly ordinary but represented access to resources most people could barely comprehend. With steady hands, I wrote out a check for the full amount of my pledge, tore it from the book, and handed it to Marcus. For the literacy program, I said simply, and Marcus, have your people call mine. Despite tonight's complications, I think there might still be opportunities for us to work together. Marcus took the check with something approaching reverence, his hands actually shaking as he saw the zeros. Elena, I don't know what to say. This is incredibly generous, and after what happened tonight, I said, looking directly at Victoria, was a learning experience for all of us. Your wife made assumptions based on limited information and acted on those assumptions in a way that revealed more about her own insecurities than about me. But that doesn't change the fact that literacy education is crucial, or that your manufacturing capabilities could help us build more libraries. Victoria was openly crying now, mascara creating dark trails down her cheeks, her carefully constructed image crumbling as completely as her social standing. But instead of satisfaction, I felt something unexpected. Compassion. This woman had spent so much energy maintaining a position she thought was threatened by everyone around her, that she had never learned to build anything real or lasting. Victoria, I said, surprising everyone, including myself, by addressing her directly. You have influence in this community. You have connections, resources, social capital. Instead of using those gifts to tear others down, imagine what you could accomplish if you channeled them into building something meaningful. She looked up at me through her tears, confusion and hope warring in her expression. I wouldn't know how to. Start small, I suggested. Find one cause you genuinely care about, one problem you want to solve. Use your network to bring attention to it, to rally support. Stop worrying about who might be trying to take something from you and start focusing on what you can give. The transformation happening in front of us was visible and profound. Victoria's shoulders straightened slightly, and for the first time all evening there was something other than calculation or cruelty in her eyes. There was possibility. Marcus stepped forward, reaching for his wife's hand. Vic, Elena's right. You've always been amazing at organizing people, at bringing communities together. Remember when you rallied the whole neighborhood to save the community garden? A small smile broke through Victoria's tears. That was different. That was just... That was leadership, I interjected firmly. That was seeing something worth preserving and taking action to protect it. The only difference between that and what I do is scale and resources. I turned to address the crowd that had been watching this drama unfold. Tonight started with assumptions and misunderstandings, but I hope it ends with something more valuable: the recognition that we all have more power to create positive change than we realize. Whether you're donating $50 or $50,000, whether you're volunteering 1 hour a week or dedicating your career to service, every contribution matters. The room erupted in applause, but it wasn't the polite, measured clapping typical of these events. This was genuine, enthusiastic recognition of something real and meaningful happening in front of them. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, many stopped to shake my hand, to exchange contact information, to share their own stories of causes they cared about and projects they wanted to launch. Victoria's attempted character assassination had backfired so completely that it had actually created the most successful fundraising network many of these people had ever experienced. Before leaving, I approached Victoria one last time. She was sitting alone at a small table, her husband having stepped away to speak with other guests about potential collaborations my presence had suddenly made possible. "Victoria," I said softly, taking the seat beside her, "I want you to know something. The dress I'm wearing tonight? It cost $12,000. My shoes cost $3,000. The pearls belong to my grandmother, who built her jewelry business from nothing after immigrating here with $10 and a sewing machine. Every piece I'm wearing represents not just wealth, but legacy, hard work, and the determination to build something lasting." She looked at me with new understanding. "You could have told me that earlier. You could have stopped me before I could have," I agreed. "But then you never would have learned what you needed to learn. And I never would have discovered what you're really capable of when you're not busy protecting what you think you might lose." I stood to leave, then paused. "The community garden project Marcus mentioned? That saved a 3-acre green space that now serves over 500 families. You didn't do that for recognition or social status. You did it because it mattered. Hold on to that feeling, Victoria. Build on it. The world needs more people who fight for what matters, not fewer." As I walked toward the exit, I heard her call my name one last time. When I turned back, she was standing, her posture straight and strong despite the tear stains on her cheeks. "Elena," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Thank you. For the donation, for the lesson, for not giving up on me even when I gave up on myself." I smiled, and for the first time all evening, it was entirely genuine. We all deserve second chances, Victoria. The question is what we do with them. 6 months later, I received an invitation to the inaugural gala for the Pemberton Community Initiative, a foundation Victoria had created to support urban green spaces and community gardens throughout the tri-state area. The invitation was handwritten, personal, and signed with a simple note: "Thank you for teaching me that true wealth is measured by what we build, not what we tear down." I attended that gala and watched with pride as Victoria, confident, passionate, and genuinely committed to her cause, raised over $2 million for communities that needed green spaces but couldn't afford them. Marcus introduced her as the most determined force for positive change I've ever known, and the love and respect in his voice was unmistakable. During her speech that night, Victoria said something that stayed with me. "6 months ago, I thought my job was to protect what my family had built. Tonight, I understand that my real job is to build something worth protecting for families who come after us." The woman who had once called me a gold digger had discovered that the most precious thing she could dig for was not gold at all, but the opportunity to transform lives and communities through genuine service. She had learned that real security doesn't come from hoarding resources or attacking perceived threats, but from creating abundance that lifts everyone higher. As I left that second gala, I reflected on how dramatically one evening can change the trajectory of multiple lives. Victoria's attempt to humiliate me had revealed strengths she didn't know she possessed, and insecurities she needed to confront. My response had opened doors to partnerships that would benefit thousands of children and families. Most importantly, we had both learned that true wealth, the kind that matters, the kind that lasts, isn't measured in dollars or diamonds or designer dresses. It's measured in the lives we touch, the communities we strengthen, and the legacy we leave behind. Victoria had called me a gold digger, never realizing that the most valuable treasure I had found wasn't material wealth, but the opportunity to help someone else discover their own capacity for greatness. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.